Canada's politics are so boring that in the middle of a federal election, Canadians are more interested in America than their own country. So, like with everything else, an American will have to do the job for them. Unlike the US, Canada has a parliamentary system. Instead of electing a president directly, Canadians vote for which political party will represent their local district. In turn, the leader of the party that wins a majority of the seats becomes prime minister. If no one party wins a majority, multiple parties may form a coalition and govern collectively. If that fails, the largest party will take charge despite not having a majority, and they will either beg another party to keep their government from falling apart, or the prime minister will be ousted by the other parties in what's known as a vote of no confidence. You may think that this would foster a dynamic, multi-party system with a wide variety of interests represented in Parliament, constantly vying for power over one another, but you'd be wrong. In practice, Canada has a two-party system where every once and then, a third party is given a detonator which lets them blow up the government whenever they please. In descending order of importance, this election has four main players: the Liberals, the Conservatives, the New Democratic Party, or NDP, and the Bloc Québécois, all of whom have completely different aims from one another. The Liberals are in the unfavorable position of trying to maintain power during a wave of global anti-incumbency. It doesn't help that their previous leader, Justin Trudeau, was a real-life Disney Channel villain with a history of scandals that rivaled George Santos. In response, they replaced him with Mark Carney, a literal international banker who served as an informal economic advisor to Trudeau. And yes, he is as boring as he looks. If the word milquetoast was a person, it would be Mark Carney. Theoretically, the Liberals don't need a majority to be safe from a no-confidence vote, but considering that one of the main reasons this election is happening right now is because an agreement they had with the NDP broke down last September, they might have no choice but to win most of the seats. Just like how you have no choice but to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and set the notifications to all if you want to see more great videos like this. Do it for Tommy Douglas, he'd be proud. The Conservatives get to play the very fun role of populists at a time when populism has never polled more popular among the populace. On the other hand, they can't afford to rule by consensus because everyone else hates them. That's because they're run by Pierre Poilievre, a self-proclaimed anti-establishment political outsider, despite the fact that he's been a member of parliament for over 20 years. He's too technocratic to be a good firebrand, but he's too inflammatory to get along with opposition politicians, which puts his party in a tough spot if they end up in the minority. I'd call him Timu Donald Trump, but that's being too generous. He's more of a knockoff JD Vance. The NDP knows they can't win, but that's not their goal. Instead, they're trying to siphon off enough votes from the two main parties so that they can retain control of the detonator for a few more years. Without that detonator, they'll be hard-pressed to hold on to power, kind of like George Bush on 9/11. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, wants you to see him as an underdog simultaneously fighting the failing liberal status quo and conservatives' outright contempt for most of the country. Under normal circumstances, this could be effective, but now that Canada's comfy position within the global balance of power is under attack, a platform that basically amounts to vote for me and I'll make it harder for everyone else to govern isn't resonating with people, leaving the party in dire straits. The Bloc is the weirdest of the four because they're not trying to elect one of their own as prime minister, nor do they want to be kingmakers. The only thing they care about is being offensively French all the time, endlessly reminding everyone how special Quebec is. There's no better way of exemplifying this than by showing you how their leader, Yves-François Blanchet, talks.
Those are things which are supposed to be applied to everybody. There are a lot of questions to be answered about that.
If a Texan politician always spoke in a thick Mexican accent and made most of their speeches in Spanish, they'd probably be laughed out of politics. But for Blanchet, his subpar English isn't a bug, it's a feature. A defiant stance against the dominant English Canadians, which not only helps maintain Quebec's privileged position in the nation's politics, but also appeals to Quebecers looking for someone who will valiantly protect their province from perceived infringements on their sovereignty by Parliament. Now is the part of the video where, if this were a normal election, I talk about how successful each party's platform has been. For instance, I could talk about how the Conservatives tried to make this election all about the carbon tax that Canadians pay whenever they buy consumer goods, but after Carney took over from Trudeau, his first move as Prime Minister was to axe the tax, making this issue a moot point. I could point out that Poilievre has tried to paint Carney as a mere continuation of Trudeau, but unlike the case of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, Carney has actively distanced himself from his predecessor, which makes the comparison much less poignant. However, none of that matters, because the most important figure of the Canadian election isn't even Canadian. It's Donald Trump. Ever since Trump ramped up his anti-Canada rhetoric upon becoming the last president of the United States, the Great White North has soured on America more than any other time since the War of 1812. Of course, there's an obvious military and economic aspect to this, as some Canadians are worried that the US is planning for an invasion, and more still are nervous that tariffs will plunge the country into a recession. However, the backlash fundamentally stems from Canada's identity crisis. Although America and Canada are very similar in almost every way, the US has always dominated this exchange of cultures, leaving Canada with little to call their own in terms of a national identity. Therefore, much of the Canadian identity is derived from the simple fact that they aren't American, often relying on ugly stereotypes about their southern neighbor to claim some sense of smug superiority meant to further validate said identity. So when Trump's rhetoric against Canada became more aggressive, many Canadians felt deeply offended, not just because of the literal implications of his words, but because without this line on a map, they have little to call their own. So who's gonna win the election? The Liberals. It's not even a question. They are in an extremely lucky position where all of their opponents have something to lose from Trump's Canada crash out. The Conservatives have the most obvious weak spot in Poilievre, who's the most closely aligned with Trump politically and rhetorically of all the leaders. The NDP is in freefall because during this key turning point for the future of Canada, people want a strong parliament that can pass laws without endless compromise and consensus building. The Bloc is under threat because the rise of Canadian nationalism in the past few months has tempered Quebec nationalism, as some Quebecers have gravitated towards their identity as Canadians. They may not have the best policies for Canada, but they have the best policies for America, and in this election, that's all that counts. If you're still watching this and you're not subscribed, then what are you even doing? Shout out to Sarcasmatron for his video, Canada's Election Explained by a Dumb American to Dumb Americans, which came out a few years ago. It's a great watch on its own right, and I took heavy inspiration from it. Link in bio if you want to check it out. If you want to watch more from me, check out the 2 videos on screen. I promise they're good. That's all for now. Bye bye, Wolfram Pack Amigo thingies.